In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and the courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776, when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people have the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man. Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers stolen from the Indians and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday. A lot to talk about today. Are white supremacy and wealthy oligarchs the only thing the GOP is fighting for? Also, how politicians incite hatred. I've got just a perfect example to share with you. And now the Senate races, Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, have gone from leaning Democrat to toss-ups. Why? I'll tell you all about that in just a moment. It's a rather startling and alarming story that it's a drum I've been beating on this program for a year now. Just, saying this is coming, and Democrats have been like, well, okay, we're going to ignore that. Second hour of our program, the most terrifying case of all is about to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll get into that. Also, will America become energy independent again? Bernie Sanders is speaking out about this. We'll talk about that. Kevin Kamps is going to drop by about radiation risk from tactical nuclear weapons. This is absolutely fascinating. We made a tactical nuke. It was called the Davy Crockett that was 1/1000th the size of the Hiroshima bomb. On the other hand, there are some tactical nukes that are 2, 3, 4, 5 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. So, we're going to talk about that. A fascinating piece in today's New York Times, too, on that. In our third hour, Velshi is going to drop by. He just came back from the hurricanes down in Florida and also, recently returned from Ukraine. We'll be discussing those topics. And Geeky Science, can some coral reefs in the Caribbean be saved? We'll talk about that. So a lot to cover on the program today, in addition to your calls at 202-808-9925. But I wanted to start with my daily take today over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, "Are White Supremacy and the Wealth of Its Oligarchs the Only Thing the GOP Fights For?" And basically, my point in this, you've got Herschel Walker and the hot mess around him right now, which is, he seems to be melting down right in front of us. But broadly speaking, this raises, a question. What is it that the Republican Party stands for? Like if you thought that they stood for being opposed to abortion, and here's Herschel Walker paying for an abortion, which is, by the way, a crime now in 3 states. And no Republicans are calling for him to be prosecuted or even to leave the race. In fact, they're saying, yeah, hell yes, I'd support him. Ted Cruz just said that this morning. Then what do they stand for? And it turns out that there's actually a formula here. There's actually a plan. The Republicans, and they're not shy about talking about it. Today's Republicans are trying to take us back to a model that once existed in the United States. Between the 1830s and the 1860s, in the South, democracy ceased to exist. There was no democracy in the South from the 1830s to the 1860s. Why? Because in the 1810s and the 1820s, the cotton gin came along, one cotton gin, very expensive machine, way out of the price range of any of the small farmers in the South. But this one machine with a single horse walking in a circle, powering it, or a water wheel, this one machine could do the work of 50 enslaved people. 50. And what this did was, all the large plantations that could afford to buy a cotton gin, and it was widely distributed across the South. Several thousand plantations bought them in the 1820s, 1830s. And because they were able to produce cotton so much more inexpensively than the smaller operations, they ran them out of business. And then they bought up their land. And so by the 1850s, you had two things going on in the South. One was it was completely economically dominated by fewer than 1,000 families, all of the southern states. These very, very large, multi-thousand, in some cases, multi-10,000 acre plantations. That these founding families, Brian Kemp's family, according to Greg Pallas yesterday telling us about this, Brian Kemp's family is one of those founding, that imported enslaved people into Georgia over the objections of President Thomas Jefferson, who was trying to stop the spread of slavery during his presidency. And, established this. And so that was one part of it, the economic part of it. The political part of it, though, I mean, obviously the Republicans are trying to reproduce that. And in fact, they've already largely done that. On 40 years of Reaganomics now, we've got 3 men who own more of the wealth than the bottom half of Americans. The top 10% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. But the top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90% of Americans. So you've got the economic piece of it, but the political piece is where they're really focusing their efforts. In the South, between the 1820s, there were the 1830s, really, and the 1860s, in the South, of course, only white people could vote. So when low-income white people, when poor white people, when sharecropper white people showed up to vote, they were met by slave patrollers. They were met by armed men at the polling places and basically told how to vote. And if they didn't vote that way, they'd be terrorized or they'd be murdered. There were lynchings of white people in the South in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s because they were trying to stop this oligarchic system, because they were advocating for democracy. Democracy ceased to exist for 30 years in the American South. And what replaced it was this thing called the Confederacy. And the Republican Party is now embracing, which is ironic since the Republicans, that was Lincoln's party who fought the Confederacy. But nonetheless, today's Republican Party is embracing Confederate symbols. They've waved the Confederate battle flag. They sing Dixie. They fight like hell to preserve statues of traitorous Confederate generals. So you ask the question, what is it the Republican Party stands for? Who really are Republicans? What is it? What kind of America are they trying to create? And the answer is very simple. They're trying to reinvent the Confederacy. They're trying to reestablish an economic system where a small number of families own basically all the wealth, or the vast majority of the wealth, well over 90% of the wealth, and we're there right now. And those families impose their political will. Now, back in the South, they did it through terror. Now they're doing it through money, through advertising. And by packing the courts. And now, we're going to get to that. The Supreme Court is looking at a case that might, really establish those old Confederate systems of gerrymandering and election rigging and voter suppression. I mean, this is how the South rolled for 100 years. How it continues to roll. And this is what they're all about. And how are they getting there? Well, they're running these insane ads right now. Now, you'll recall back in 2020, every single Republican in Congress voted to give everybody in America a $1,200 check. Everybody in, nobody out. That included all the people in jail. They're American citizens, or at least those who are American citizens. They have Social Security numbers. Send them a check. So now, with dark money from billionaires and corporate funders, Mitch McConnell's Senate Leadership Fund has dropped tens of thousands of dollars into these races, these Senate races all around the country, where they are running ads like, Val Demings looking like, screaming into a microphone with just this absolutely frightening look on her face, a black woman, with the headline, Demings and Pelosi, $1 billion in stimulus to criminals and illegal immigrants. Keep in mind, all the Republicans voted for this. They're doing the same thing with Mandela Barnes. They're doing, well, actually, he wasn't in Congress. He wasn't voted, but they're saying he's soft on crime. They're doing the same thing with, it's just, pick your Republican, Reverend Warnock. They're doing the same thing with Reverend Warnock down in Georgia. Reject Warnock. He chose felons over Georgia families. I mean, he wasn't even in Congress when this vote happened, and they're accusing him of this. Herschel Walker is running ads saying that Warnock, was in favor of letting criminals out of jail. This is just nuts. There's a piece about this over at rawstory.com. He's the fact checker at CNN says this is just a lie. It's a flat out lie. This assertion. This is the fact checker. His name is Daniel Daly. He says this assertion, which Walker is running, here's the assertion, quote, Raphael Warnock called police thugs, then cut their funding. Well, Warnock never cut any police funding. He was never in a position to do so. The United States Senate doesn't control police funding to begin with. So the CNN fact checker said this assertion is so imaginary that Walker's campaign hasn't even responded to requests to identify what he's talking about. But they're continuing to run the ads, lying about Democrats and using crime to scare people. This is what the GOP is doing. And by the way, this strategy is winning for them. I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But why are they doing this? Because they're trying to reestablish the Confederacy. White supremacy, oligarchy, and democracy. This is the end game for the GOP. The majority of Republican candidates across the United States right now, 229 of them, deny Joe Biden won the election. These people are anti-democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And many of them will proudly tell you that. They'll say, oh, America's a republic, not a democracy. It doesn't matter what the people say. Right. And welcome back, Don in Corvallis, Oregon. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hi. Thanks for the talk this morning about that. That's great. I want to know how many barrels of oil we export and when did it start and the cost we get for it and who do we export it to?
I don't know who we export it to. What I do know is that the export ban was in place for 40 years. It expired or it didn't expire. It was removed by Congress in 2015. U.S. crude exports rose 600% in the 5 years after the ban was eliminated, in those 6 years since then. In the first half of this year, this is from Food and Water Watch, in the first half of this year, the U.S. exported 11% more gasoline than last year as companies sought higher profit margins. So we're not just exporting oil. We're exporting refined oil. We're exporting gasoline at the same time that we're saying, oh, we don't have enough gasoline, so we've got to raise the price. That's what's going on.
Yeah. It's amazing. How much does the oil company get for each barrel of oil that we export?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Well, presumably they get the world price, which was $80 a barrel and is now heading toward $100 a barrel.
Yeah, I think it costs $30 a barrel to produce. Is that correct?
Production costs vary wildly. If you've got a brand new well that's basically a gusher that's pushing oil up to the surface, like they had in Iraq, for example, production costs were under $3 a barrel because you didn't need to pump the stuff out of the ground. It came up under its own pressure. On the other hand, if you're sucking hard on the straw like Saudi Arabia is doing right now, they've used up about half of their oil, so they've got to run pumps. And they got to draw the oil up from deep underground. Their production costs can run as high as $30, $40, $50 a barrel. It varies from well to well, and that's why you've got wells that are capped all across the Midwest and all across the South and the Southwest. That periodically they'll open these wells back up because they're wells that cost $25, $35, $45, in some cases $55 a barrel to produce. Well, when oil's at $100 a barrel, it's worth opening those wells back up again. When oil was at $30 a barrel back during 2020, those wells were being capped because the production cost was above $30 a barrel.
Well, I appreciate your insight. Thanks for the information.
You're welcome, Don. Thank you for the call. We're going to get into that in more detail in the third hour of the program, but this is what's going on. I mean, we are literally exporting gasoline. The oil companies, the fossil fuel industry in the United States, is literally exporting gasoline at the same time that they are citing a shortage of gasoline as the reason why they're raising prices. This is pure profit-seeking behavior. And, Democrats, frankly, I think should be talking about this, although the next 4 weeks, we're just 4 weeks out from the election. The next 4 weeks are going to be all crime all the time. As I have been predicting for a year now, I have written over and over and over again at Hartmann Report about how crime is like the most visceral thing. If, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, it doesn't matter how much food is in your pantry, it doesn't matter, anything. If you think, if you think somebody's breaking into your house, or if you think somebody's gonna, hijack your car, all that other stuff goes out the window. Safety is the most important consideration. It's a basic human need. We'll continue along these lines in just a moment. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. It's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. And welcome back. So There is a way. I mean, this point that I've been making and that I want to make is that fear and hate really do work politically. If you can cause people to believe that your opponents are basically less than human, that they hate you, that they don't respect you, that they don't think of you as a human being, if you can convince people of that, they will turn into animals. Essentially, they will fight, they will kill. This is how demagogic leaders crank up armies. This is the sales pitch that Hitler used. The Poles are going to attack us. The Jews are corrupting our country, etc. Well, here's the latest example. This is Nate's going to play this audio, Sean. This is the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, before President Biden arrived, and this is Ron DeSantis basically telling his people that the media in America hates them. And you just listen to him. Here it is.
Well, look, I mean, I think part of it, quite frankly, you have national regime media that they wanted to see Tampa because they thought that that'd be worse for Florida. That's how these people think. Yeah. I mean, they don't care about the people of this state. They don't care about the people of this community. They want to use storms and destruction from storms as a way to advance their agenda. And they don't care what destruction's in their wake. They don't care about the lives here. If they can use it to pursue their political agenda, they will do it. And so I think there was.
So there you go. It's all about storm coverage. Ron DeSantis is using to gin up hate. We've got these Senate races now across the United States where tens of millions of dollars in dark money have flowed into Mitch McConnell's hands, and he is now spending this money. And they're doing it with one single issue: crime. Democrats are soft on crime. Republicans are going to be tough on crime. You all know crime is up. You can see all the homeless people. They're criminals. This is their sales pitch. And it's working. The Wisconsin and Pennsylvania races have both gone from leaning Democratic to now toss-ups. And there's still 4 weeks to go. They've shifted multiple points in both cases. This is frankly, this is a big deal. One of the Marquette University Law School political science professor, Charles Franklin, says, he's speaking of these Republican Senate candidates, he says, they've all got the same crib notes: attack Democrats on crime. And, some of the Democrats are saying, why is it taking so long to figure out this crime messaging? Why does it feel like Ron Johnson had a month to hammer away at Mandela Barnes unanswered? The ad says that Barnes stands to defund the police, and they try to tie him to the squad, more people of color. Oh my God! And the Democrats have no answer for this. And I hate saying this, but I have been talking about this for over a year. Writing op-eds at Hartmann Report about it, talking to Democratic candidates and Democratic politicians when they come on the air, saying crime is going to be a big issue. In the Oregonian yesterday, our newspaper here, we may well have a Republican governor as a result of this election. Why? Because crime is such a big issue, and the Democrats, the main reason we'll have a Republican governor if we get one is because two billionaires in this state are funding a third-party candidate who used to be a Democrat, who's really kind of a Republican, who is running on the issue of crime. And she's pulling votes away mostly from the Democrat, from Tina Kotek. This is just terrible.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the reality is the Republicans are literally not offering a single solution. They have nothing to say positive about crime. It's all, Democrats are in favor of crime, essentially. It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions, and new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism, as a neo-colonial system, races not to disarm, which is hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, the .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 15 million and climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a Deuce, or maybe even a Tech-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary t-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser t-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neocolonial Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993. Mortality Key by Brian. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Welcome back. So are you seeing these crime ads? Are you seeing the sentiment shift in your state? This is very concerning. I would like to know what the Democratic Party is planning to do about this. Bill in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yes, sir. I'd like to talk to you about the semiconductor crunch this nation is in and how Texas Instruments is going to be our savior. Okay,
go for it.
Okay, right. As we speak, they have two fabs. Fab is a factory that makes semiconductors. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're completing two in Richardson or Dallas, which are environmentally sustainable, the first and only fabs in the world to be environmentally sustainable.
That's good.
And they will be economically competitive with anything made in Asia, China, Japan.
Yeah, Micron just announced a multi-billion-dollar factory that they're building up in the Northeast, too. I mean, the CHIPS Act freed up $50 billion, federal dollars.
But TI started this in 2003, long before.
Good on them. Good on them. I mean, I think it's a shame that we have to basically pay these companies to do this after they just had one of the most profitable quarters in history. But, if that's what it takes, we've got to bring chip manufacturing back to the United States. I'm with you, Bill. Bill, thank you for that. Andrew in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I think the next time we sell arms to Saudi Arabia or help them with wars, we get it in writing that they will produce a certain number of barrels of oil every day and put it on the market, because I'm tired of them yanking our chain.
I think we should pull all of our weapon systems from them. I think we should say, okay, cool. You want to throw in with Russia? Good luck. And pull all support for our weapon systems. You want spare parts for your American-made, so you're going to have to do what Iran did. Let them do that. Let them go their own way. And then, we're a rich nation. We've got a hell of a lot of money. Go back to Bernie's $3 trillion, and let's solarize the whole damn country right now.
I agree. And real quick, I'll get off the phone right after this. We are united. We're voting, and we're winning. I don't want to hear any poor mouthing about losing or, oh, my gosh, the House. We are united, we're voted, and we're winning, period. Spread enthusiasm, not be down about it. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Well, good luck with that, Andrew. Thank you. I understand your sentiment. Titus in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Titus, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Great to hear from you, man. My question to you, brother, is as you think about these times, have you, as you can look back, have you ever imagined times like this? Or, what is that?
Strangely enough, Titus, when I was 13 years old and my dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting because he said I needed to know who the crazies were in our neighborhood, they were describing essentially this America that the Republicans are trying to bring us. They were just back at that time. That was 1960. What? If I was 13, that was 1964. That was when the main issue that the John Birch Society had was Brown versus Board of Education. That's why Fred Koch was helping subsidize billboards all across America that said impeach Earl Warren because, oh my God, integrated schools. But basically the vision that they had was to split America along racial lines and along lines of wealth and create an oligarchy, a white supremacist oligarchy in the United States. In my opinion, it's still their vision. And not just the John Birch Society. I think this is the Republican Party's official vision right now.
Exactly. It is about wealth and power.
Yeah.
And
race.
Yeah. And these are transgenerational levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not just one person. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 63 was what, 40, 50, 60 years ago almost.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and we've seen it. It was hidden like in the 80s. It's there. It's very powerful, but we weren't quite as Today it's manifest plainly, right?
No, they were doing it by dog whistle back then. They'd talk about states' rights and they talk about crime and they talk about inner cities and all these buzzwords that basically were buzzwords for race. Now they're running pictures of Val Demings and Raphael Warnock and Mandela Barnes on TV, making them look like quote angry black people, and they're pretty open about it now, and it's winning for them. It's there's enough white racists out there if they can draw them out of the woodwork to actually help them win elections. Titus, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Thanks for watching us on Twitter Live, by the way. Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. Hey, Bob, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Sure. Hi, Tom. I wanted to make an observation about controlling money in politics. I thought Representative Khanna had the best idea, and it was on your show about a month ago, saying that every taxpayer would get a $100 credit to put that towards the candidate that they want.
Right.
And do you think that could ever be a reality?
Well, it could if the Democrats get a large enough majority in this election. That's the sort of reform that I think could pass Congress, in the next Congress. But I'm very concerned. I'm frankly very concerned.
That would be a great game changer because you would totally control. The people would actually, the government would actually be of the people.
That's right. And which is what Republicans are terrified of. It's what the old Confederacy was terrified of. You've got a top-down, hierarchical, authoritarian, oligarchic system here that the Republican Party is trying to impose on the United States, and that their progenitors, their role model, the Confederacy, imposed on the South, and this is what they're trying to resurrect: is a race-based, hierarchical oligarchy here in the United States, where only wealthy people's voices have anything, have any consequence whatsoever in the political arena. And we've been largely there for about a decade now. It's been at least a decade. 30, 40 years of Reaganomics and the rise of the Republican Party and the super gerrymandering and the Supreme Court helping them out and gutting the Voting Rights Act and taking away the guardrails against dark money with Citizens United. The result of all that has been that the Republican Party now, it has a very good chance of turning the entire country into the Confederacy. And, it troubles me tremendously, shall we say. Bob, thank you for the call. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to echo what you were saying about what the end game is for the Republicans because, everybody's scratching their head about Herschel Walker and, why is the GOP still standing by him? Well, the same reason why they stood by Donald Trump. They don't care about, how it looks. They don't care about hypocrisy. It's about
character.
They don't care about any of that. It's about establishing a white nationalist, theocratic state. And part of that
Dana Loesch said it on Fox yesterday. I don't care if he had an abortion, or paid for an abortion. I want control of the Senate.
Right. They want part of that is diluting the voices of black voters. You got this case here in North Carolina where they're trying to argue that the state legislature has the power to, I guess.
And there's one down in Alabama, too. Yep. Going before the Supreme Court.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, said that Ketanji Brown Jackson wants to give more votes to minorities. They're being clear about what they want.
Yep.
So while everybody's scratching their head about why is the GOP standing by these people, it's not about the principles of character. It's about what they can do. I mean, the fact that Herschel Walker's black doesn't matter. Matter of fact, it's better that he's black because they can say, well, see, we're not racist,
right?
Even though they're using him to advance an agenda, which is dilute the black vote, carve up all the districts. Ron DeSantis did that in Florida. They're doing it all over the place.
Yeah, they've got the same. You know, they've got an advocate for that kind of thing in Tim Scott too, and it's really tragic. But you know, hey, it is what it is. There have always been people who will you know, in exchange for wealth and power, you know, disempower the people with whom typically they have been associated. Although, you know, right. I think in many cases class trumps race. And that, you know, may be, yeah, well, that's a whole nother conversation. You know, that's really a whole nother conversation. But
that's the agenda. So, you know, I just want to echo that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Kevin, thank you very much. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind?
Yes, I a while back, and I could even say it was as far back as the Reagan administration, I heard that he coined the word homeless because he's the one who got it started. So as far as I'm concerned, it's the Republicans who have caused the homelessness, and desperate people cause crimes. I remember when my daughter went to Honduras about 18 years ago, and she brought back movies of the neighborhoods, so-called middle class, where the people had barbed wires around their high fences in their yards to protect themselves from the homeless. And, of course, that's a third world country, which I believe is what the direction the Republicans are taking us.
Yes.
And as far as your comment about the South, as I remember, the South, right after the Civil War, developed a mantra: the South will rise again.
Yep.
And it looks to me like they are.
Yeah, it's the religion of the lost cause. And it has been adopted by the Republican Party. It's one of the reasons, I mean, we're not fighting about statues this week, but, you know, it's why they're defending these, you know, Confederate generals. The Republican Party is trying to reestablish the Confederacy, only this time they're trying to win the entire United States. Susan, thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're picking up your phone calls here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You are here on the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Malcolm in Bluebell, Pennsylvania. Hey, Malcolm, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom, I have a question for you. You had a caller many moons ago that said Democrats never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And so my question is with Warnock and Georgia, how do we defend a candidate who won't take time to defend himself, even if the lies are outright blatant lies? Because it's nothing to make a YouTube video. I follow Bernie Sanders, and he posts videos daily, and even Instagram, Twitter, those outlets, which are free, just to at least respond to some of these allegations and fact check.
Warnock is starting to run ads basically saying that the ads against him are lies, but those defensive ads always, you know, they always have 1/5 or thereabouts the punch of an offensive ad. And in fact, when you start responding to offensive ads, what you are doing is causing people to pay attention to them. The minute you say, "Oh, that guy's lying about me," everybody goes, "What? What lie? What did he say? I want to know." So that is always the worst position to be in, and it's like the Democrats are like, "Oh, we didn't see this coming," and I'm like, you know, there's been a bunch of us out here saying for a year or more, they're going to come after you around crime. Look around you. There are homeless people everywhere. And yes, obviously, they're not all criminals. But, you know, many of these homeless communities are turning into chop shops, and people nearby are complaining about their homes being broken into and things. You know, literally a day doesn't go by when I don't see or walk by a stolen car. And these are real issues. And you know, the Democrats are in power, and they have failed to address. I mean, even to address them cosmetically. Bill Clinton understood this, right? Back in 1996, when he was running for re-election, what did he do? He got legislation passed to put 100,000 additional cops on the streets. That, that in and of itself was not terrible or even racist legislation. It was 100,000 police officers. And he went from state to state all across the country, pounding that drum. And people will, oh, yeah, okay, Bill Clinton, he's tough on crime. Where are the Democrats who are talking about crime? They're not out there. I'm not seeing it.
Right.
And it's a huge lost opportunity. So, I'm sorry?
Exactly. A few months ago with the raid on Mar-a-Lago, there was the whole defund the FBI campaign. Even Matt Gaetz on television saying the same thing, but there was never a response or a rebuttal to it. It was like, okay, they said it is fine. It ate up about 5 minutes of a news cycle, and then it was back to whatever else.
All right. Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene was talking about it. Matt Gaetz, you're absolutely right. It was the the Hate America crowd in the GOP
right.
who were talking about let's defund the FBI. And and truth be told, there were people who were yelling defund the police. I don't know of any. Well, actually, I guess there's a couple of elected Democrats who were using that rhetoric briefly in 2020. But, mostly it was just wildly amplified by the media. And
right.
tragically, because, it plays right into this Republican idea that Democrats are soft on crime. There are, to the best of my knowledge, no Democrats who want more crime. It doesn't exist. But, they need to be proactive. Malcolm, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally, he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We're picking up your phone calls here. James in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, James, you want to disagree with me?
Hey. Yes, sir, Tom. I'm not sure about telling the truth how that's spreading hate and fear in regards to crime. If I remember, I know what you just said a few minutes ago, the Democratic Party is the one that supported defunding the police department. The town I live in is a Democratic mayor, the chief of police, the sheriff are all Democrats. They all supported defunding the police. I don't know one Republican. If so, tell me who it was. They said, let's defund the police department. And then now they're going to say...
Well, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene and you got Donald Trump. I mean, defund the FBI. They're calling for that.
Well, I don't agree with that. Yeah. I didn't say I agree with that.
Neither do I. But James, you're right. James, you're right. The whole defund the police thing is coming back to bite Democrats in the backside really badly. And again, they weren't prepared for it. It's not like a whole bunch of us haven't been saying for quite some time now, this is coming. This is an old trick. This was what Richard Nixon did with his war on drugs. This is what Richard Nixon did with his silent majority stuff, about his war on crime. Democrats should have standard stuff that they pull out, just like Republicans do. I mean, these claims that Republicans are making that Democrats are weak on crime and that they love criminals and all this kind of stuff. They're disingenuous claims. There are some cities that have moved some resources out of police departments and into, for example, mental health, and it's actually produced positive results. But once you've got to start explaining stuff at that level, you're right, James. Nobody's listening. James, thank you for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just got me a contract with the DNC. They're going to allow me to control the messaging for the midterms.
Thank God.
I got enough sound bites to put the Republican Party on blast. This is what we're going to do. We're going to put the Republican Party on blast. We're going to tie the Republicans into abortion laws, high gas prices, gun violence, inflation, and we're going to show how their policies of giving the billionaires the tax cuts and whatnot, how it's led to wars and homelessness and no more health care protections. You see, fear, Dr. Hartmann, is the tool that we got to use, but we want to be the ones manipulating it. And then we're going to put their donors on class, the billionaire people that are buying our government, and the cherry on the cake is going to be how the Supreme Court have been the enablers. So you got to put them on the defensive. No personalities, the entire Republican Party, and people will have to say, yeah, sounds about right. What do you think, Tommy?
I think it's brilliant. I think they should hire you, Morris.
I'm only messing with you, Tom. You have a good day, my brother.
No, I'm telling you, they should hire you. You're good. You're really good. John in Roselle, Illinois. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Hope everything's good with you.
Yeah, I hope. It sounded like you had a whole shelf full of plates fall on you or something there.
No, I'm in a gym.
Oh, okay. So what's up?
So, real quick, I just want to say that the Democrats should try to get ahead of the Republicans with the stickers at the gas pumps. They should have one in the works right now saying OPEC and the Republicans did this.
Right. OPEC and Trump.
Yeah,
Trump and his Saudi friends did this to us.
Well, with the midterms, you guys got to say the Republicans, otherwise, Trump's not on the ballot.
No, I get. Well, but Trump is on the ballot. I mean, he's
right. Yeah, he's the ghost behind all those candidates. But, and then one other thing I want to make a quick mention of is, it's pretty aggravating what the oil companies can do to control the markets. I used to own a fuel Metro 20 years ago, 50 miles to the gallon, unquestioned. I had two of them, and then GM bought them and killed the whole program.
Yeah.
So
we had a Honda Incite. It got 72 miles to the gallon. They don't make them anymore, but
the big companies buy them up. And
that was amazing. This was Honda. I mean, it was a great little car. I don't know why they took it off the market. I guess it was small. It was really small. Anyhow, John, I got to move on. I want to get one more call in here before the end of the hour. Thank you. Eric in Fountain Valley, California. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, you were speaking about how Republicans are lying in their ads to try to take over the House and Senate. I just want to tell you what's happening in my local congressional district. So there are two main ads that are running. One main ad that's running, which accuses Nancy Pelosi of passing a bill giving $1.9 trillion to so-called elites for their vacations and their boats and their planes, and that the candidate, who's not an incumbent, the Democrat, is in favor of this. And
giving money to who?
To elites.
Oh, elites.
For their vacation and boats and planes.
Yeah, got it.
And, usually you can find some grain of something that might be considered true in what they say. But this one, I've been just, scrambling my brain trying to figure out.
They have no obligation to tell the truth, and they are very clear about that.
Yeah, I cannot figure that one out at all.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is the Trump tax cut, where the Republicans gave $1.9 trillion to elites in the 1%. Why they're blaming that on Democrats? I guess it's just projection.
Or something like that.
Yeah, the other thing that she's saying is that this is
I'm sorry, I got to run, Eric. We just hit the break here. We will be back in the next hour. I want to get into the most terrifying case to be heard by the Supreme Court and American energy independence. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions, and new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism as a neo-colonial system races not to disarm, which is hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, the .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 15 million and climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a Deuce, or maybe even a Tech-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well-honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neocolonial Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, the Supreme Court's, welcome back to the second hour of our program. The Supreme Court's session has started. It began this week, and it's already getting interesting. It looks like they're going to further gut the Voting Rights Act, although Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson had some really good points to make. I mean, basically, the Republicans and the North Carolina and Alabama and all these states that are trying to defend their gerrymandering, these extreme gerrymandering, are coming in saying, well, you know, we all need to be race neutral. We need to be blind to race. That's the goal of America, isn't it? And she's saying, no, these laws were actually passed because race neutral meant white people maintain control and keep out black people, because they're the majority and they've, rigged the system in this way. And these laws are designed specifically to give people who are not white an opportunity to participate also, to vote specifically. And, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a real interesting time. But I think the big case that we all need to keep an eye on is Moore v. Harper, which is probably coming up in the next couple of weeks. And Moore v. Harper is ostensibly about gerrymandering, but it turns on this independent state legislature theory, the ISL theory, and this independent state legislature theory is based on the Constitution saying that the individual states' legislatures shall define the time and place and choosing and the circumstances, under which the electors are chosen. And basically what they're trying to say is that individual state legislators can overrule the will of the voters. Once Republicans have a majority in the state legislature, even if it's by gerrymandering, they can overrule the will of the voters and basically install whatever kind of government that they want. In North Carolina, for example, the vote in North Carolina is pretty much 50-50, Democrat, Republican. In fact, slightly favors Democrats. That's why North Carolina has a Democratic governor. So the statewide vote is 50-50. And yet, out of the 14 seats that North Carolina has in the House of Republicans, 10 of them are Republican. Now, it should be 7, right, if it's 50-50? And if they adopt this independent state legislature theory, the Republicans will simply be able to say, okay, that's it. We run this state, we will run this state forever. And particularly if the Supreme Court goes along with this idea that the legislature, at least with regard to the White House, with regard to the Electoral College, that the legislature can say, yeah, the people of North Carolina voted for, Joe Biden, but we're going to give the vote to Donald Trump. This is what Trump tried to do 2 years ago. He tried to get these states to say, it doesn't matter how the people voted, we're going to give the election to you. He tried to talk Brad Raffensperger into that. He tried to talk Brian Kemp into that. He tried to talk Doug Ducey into that. State after state, he tried. He tried to talk Mr. Voss, the head of the Republican head of the legislature in Wisconsin, into this. Basically saying, doesn't matter how what the voters say. What matters is what the legislature says, because that's what it says in the Constitution. Now, it requires a rather jaundiced reading of the Constitution to come to that conclusion, but hey, a jaundiced reading of the Constitution is nothing new for Republicans. Over at The Guardian, they're writing, a supermajority of 6 unelected ultra-conservative justices, 5 of whom were put on the bench by presidents who did not win the popular vote. 5 out of the 6 of these right-wingers are put on the court by Republicans who lost the election, have aggressively grabbed yet another batch of cases that will allow them to move American law to the extreme right and threaten U.S. democracy in the process. And they're talking about this independent state legislature theory. I wrote about this, 2, 3, 4 months ago. I probably should write about it again. But, the bottom line is that if this case is decided the way that it looks like the Supreme Court is inclined to decide it, certainly it takes 4 votes to get a case of Supreme Court members to accept a case for the court to hear. And so clearly the 4 conservatives who said, yes, put this on our docket, and it might have been more than 4, but we know that, the threshold is 4 votes, that the 4 votes who said, yes, put this on this docket, they very much are totally, down with the idea of America being run the way that Russia is run by Putin, or Hungary is run by Viktor Orban, or Turkey by Erdogan, or Poland by Duda. I mean, they're saying, yeah, you want to rig elections, that's fine. As long as it's up for our side, we're good with that. And this didn't come out of nowhere, by the way. I mean, this movement to rig our elections, to have permanent minority control, white Republican control, minority control, and to integrate religion into the Republican Party, all of these things came out of the white backlash and the white billionaire backlash. Back then it was Fred Koch and the John Birch Society, to the backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. And that backlash was so deep and so, I mean, I remember the late 1950s, early 1960s driving around, this country with my family. And this was not in the South. I mean, you know, we took a vacation to Massachusetts once when I was a kid in the late 50s. You know, we certainly drove a lot around Michigan. And I remember these billboards that said, impeach Earl Warren, that were paid for in part by Fred Koch and the John Birch Society. And they wanted to impeach Earl Warren because he was presided over a Supreme Court that said that your white children are going to have black kids in the school with them. This is now the law. And, you know, you had several counties that shut down their schools for more than one county shut down their public schools for as I recall, several years. You had this campaign of massive resistance, particularly in the South, but, you know, also in Virginia and Maryland. And out of this grew this right-wing movement that says government is a terrible force. Government doesn't do things well. Government needs to be replaced by the private market. We need to replace government-run schools with private schools. We need to, you know, basically take and let's you know, let's change the law so that we can go back to having a segregated society, a class society, where the working poor at the bottom, with a small middle class, because a large middle class, when 65% of us were in the middle class in the 1970s and 1980s, when a third of us had union jobs, that was just too much for the GOP. Reagan had to come in and break that one up, and he did. We're down to 45% of Americans now in the American middle class. And nobody seems to be talking about it. And the Supreme Court now is preparing to say, yes, this is the way it is, this is the way it shall be. And we're going to hand Republican-controlled states, and the Republicans are no idiots. You know, when they started putting together these networks of right-wing radio stations, it was so cheap to buy stations in Wyoming, in Montana, in Iowa, in Utah, in Idaho, in many of your southern states. It was cheap to buy radio stations and put right-wing talk radio on there. And, you know, boom. If you can control enough states, then you can control the country. And this is something that, you know, the right wing figured out back in the 50s and 60s. They put together a campaign to do it. It's been very well funded to the tune of billions of dollars over the years by mostly right-wing billionaires and giant corporations. And it's tearing our country apart. It's threatening civil war. We need to get dark money out of politics. We need to reverse this awful Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, and we need to look out for more V. Harper.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because it is coming down the road, and it is going to be bad. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Karen in Missouri City, Texas. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
How are you today? I'm listening to everything you're saying and quite upset, but it's not stuff that we didn't know was happening. And I just heard your piece about racism and what's going on. And Betsy DeVos, when she came in, did absolutely nothing during COVID. But she made sure she did one thing. She didn't even know what they meant when they were talking about guns on campus. She thought they were talking about a gun for a bear. But one thing she came in ready to do was to get our taxpayer dollars to fund private education.
That's right.
And in other words, all we did was help segregate, pay for segregation.
Yep. Yep. And the more you can destroy public schools, and public schools are the place where the lowest income people have really no choice but to send their kids. I mean, they're offering vouchers, like in Arizona now, they're offering vouchers to every kid in the state, trying to destroy the public schools. But the vouchers don't cover the entire cost of going to a private school. So
they don't.
So the vouchers are basically a subsidy for upper middle class and wealthy families, and everybody else gets screwed. And, everybody else gets in the public schools, and the public schools basically turn into ghettos, into educational ghettos. And this is exactly what the Republicans have been trying to do since 1954.
And that's the plan, you know,
Yep.
and it worked.
Yep.
It really worked.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Karen. And you know, we need to call it out. We need to push back on it, and we need to take back this country. Karen, thank you. Thank you very much. Greg in Steilacoom, Washington. I got to be mispronouncing that. Oh, Greg just hung up. Sometimes you try to take your phone off mute and you hang it up by accident. I'm guessing what happened. George in Santee, California. Hey, George, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. On this defunding the police, didn't that start out not to take police off the force or whatever? In my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about demilitarizing the police when the police started rolling out these tanks and armored carriers and stuff in response to these Black Lives Matters protests. You know, and somehow it got
It was partly that. It was, you know, like, you know, roll back the Reagan's, what is it, 1099 program or whatever it's called. There's a 4-digit moniker for it, but you know, his program where the military surplus equipment goes to police departments. Part of it was roll back that. Part of it was just pure rage and easily understood rage. You know, if police were coming into my neighborhood and randomly killing people and getting away with it, and they had been doing it for a century, I'd be seriously pissed off. And I'd be saying, do something about these cops. And part of it was, you know, a third area, which gets virtually no discussion because it requires some thought. But, you know, we're actually doing this here in Portland, and it's working. And that is having a secondary, essentially a secondary 9/11 service, where if somebody's having a mental health crisis or if it's domestic violence or something like that, maybe domestic violence isn't the best example, but if it's the sort of thing where having a mediator or a psychologist show up instead of a cop is more likely to produce a good result, do that. And we've been doing that, and it's been working. But, you know, defund the police was just a terrible, terrible brand, essentially. And it was a brand that got associated with the Democratic Party, largely through the media. It was a very small minority of people who were yelling about, you know, defund the police, tragically. George, I got to run. But, you know, the Republicans grabbed hold of that, and they're going to beat us up with it forever. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Our phrase for the day is narcissistic collapse. This is what happens when a person like Donald Trump with severe narcissistic personality disorder can no longer maintain the facade of their own greatness. When the lies that they have used to build this facade begin to disintegrate, they either implode, typically through drugs or alcohol or other kind of semi-suicidal behavior, or even suicide itself. They typically either implode, or more frequently they explode. They start blaming everybody around them or whatever institutions they can to deny that the collapse is their own fault. They cannot accept the blame. It's part of their narcissistic personality disorder. And instead they go after the institutions or the people who are pointing out their failure. In the case of Donald Trump, going after the FBI, going after the courts. Look out. This is going to get really, really ugly. I've got a whole long video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. I also wanted to talk about oil. The other thing that Republicans are going to be beating Democrats up badly with, and these ads will be coming in the next few days. You can just count on it. Is going to be gas prices. And of course, this is because Donald Trump's good buddies, the Saudis, just said, you know, F you to America. And, you know, they just threw in with Russia. And Bernie Sanders is now coming out saying, okay, enough is enough. Yesterday, and I wrote an op-ed about this yesterday, in which I said we need to open negotiations with Venezuela and bring them back into the community of nations and get their oil back on the market. Number one. Number two, we need to ban the export of American oil and petroleum products unless it's, you know, the exception being to Europe in the face of the Russian, you know, cutting off of the Nord Stream pipeline, the liquid natural gas. But we have seen a 500% increase in our exports of gasoline. over the last 6 years since it was legalized. It used to be illegal to export gasoline, to export crude oil from the United States. We legalized it in 2015. It was slipped into an omnibus spending bill. I don't think anybody even knew it was there other than the people who put it there. And the oil industry jumped on that. And now, instead of supplying us with gasoline, you've got American refineries that are shipping gasoline overseas, driving up the price of gasoline in the United States, which drives up their profits in the United States. And their excuse is real simple. Hey, we're all out of gas. And everybody's like, oh, geez, they're out of gas. There's a whole piece in the Washington Post today about how refineries are closing down because of environmental regulations and this and that and the other thing. They kind of fail to point out that we apparently have a surplus of gas if we're exporting it, gasoline. And yet the price is going up and they're going, oh, we don't have any. So, you know, this is what Bernie Sanders said. He said, we must end OPEC's illegal price-fixing cartel, eliminate military assistance to Saudi Arabia, and move aggressively to renewable energy. Spot on. This is an emergency. President Biden needs to declare an emergency. Congress needs to appropriate a couple of $1 trillion to solarize and windize, if that's a word, the United States, and make it so that we are no longer dependent in any way at all on fossil fuels coming from Saudi Arabia. And take us off the world price for oil, which is controlled by Saudi Arabia and Russia. And let us have our own domestic supply, our own domestic price for petroleum products in the United States, because we're producing enough for ourselves if the oil companies here were not exporting our finished products. Ed Markey, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, said, quote, today's OPEC announcement is a reminder that as the United States is dependent on foreign oil and on domestic oil that is produced on a global market, the supply and cost of the energy Americans use to operate our cars, heat our homes, and power our economy is reliant on decisions made by and for hostile fossil-fueled regimes. Legislation was just introduced into the House of Representatives by Representatives Tom Malinowski, Sean Casten, and Susan Wild, Democrats from New Jersey, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, that would require the removal of U.S. troops and U.S. missile defense systems from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, which is supporting Russia and the Saudis in screwing America on fossil fuels. This is a recent study by the Government Accountability Office. The Pentagon delivered $54.6 billion in military aid to Saudi Arabia and the UAE between 2015 and 2021. We gave them $54 billion worth of weapons, and they're telling us that we can go screw ourselves. This included missiles, helicopters, and bombs. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars in recent years refueling Saudi jets as they're attacking Yemen, which is nuts. It's a humanitarian catastrophe. Congressman Ro Khanna, who's going to be on our program tomorrow, he co-authored an op-ed calling for an end to, quote, missile and weapons system sales the Saudis so desperately need. Meanwhile, Mitch Jones, the managing director of policy over at Food and Water Watch, says it's time to take real action to rein in this outrageous corporate profiteering. That should start with Congress passing a ban on gasoline exports. We had that ban for 40 years. It got lifted in 2015. We have seen U.S. crude exports rise nearly 600% in the 5 years since then. Food and Water Watch noted yesterday, quote, in the first half of this year, the U.S. exported 11% more gasoline than last year as companies sought higher profit margins. So the market goes soft in the United States because people aren't driving as much because the price is up. And what do the refineries do? They start selling their gasoline overseas and maintaining a shortage here. Tyson Slocum, who's been a guest on this program many times, his Public Citizens Energy program, he said record oil and natural gas exports have realigned the U.S. fossil fuel industry to prioritize maximizing profits for international markets. They cannot be relied on to deliver affordable energy, as their calls to expand production will only fuel exports and drive domestic prices higher. We need to ban the export of fossil fuels from the United States. It's that simple.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Cut off Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates from U.S. military supplies. It's time to take a stand. Our book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Cabinet, George Washington and the Creation of an American Institution by Leslie M. Chervinsky. This is from the introduction. At 11:30 in the morning on August 22nd, 1789, a large cream-colored coach pulled up to the front door of Federal Hall, 26 Wall Street in New York City. 6 matching, perfectly groomed horses pulled the elegant carriage with sparkling gold trim. The coachman, outfitted in crisp white and red trimmed livery, jumped down from the back of the carriage and opened the door. An elegantly dressed man with powdered hair stepped down with a portfolio of papers under his arm. He towered over his companion, Henry Knox, the acting Secretary of War, and his slaves attending to the horses. His ornate coach and his imposing presence drew curious stares from strangers passing by on the street. He walked up to the front door of Federal Hall and was immediately announced. George Washington, the first president of the United States, had arrived for his first visit to the United States Senate. This was no ordinary meeting. 2 years earlier, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia had agreed that the Senate would advise and consent on treaties and other questions of foreign policy. But in practice, how the president and the Senate would interact remained for the first office holders to work out. Washington's relationship with the Senate was just one of countless governing details that he had to establish as the first president. Establishing precedent for every presidential action consumed his thoughts in the first few years of his administration. Not only would the American public and international audience judge his every action, but his successors would be guided by his choices. The stakes could not have been higher. The future of the Republic rested on Washington making the right decisions. He approached every new situation with caution and took action only after consulting with his advisors. His first visit to the Senate was no different. The tense relationship between Native American nations and the United States posed an immediate challenge after Washington's inauguration on April 30th, 1789. Most Native American nations had sided with the British during the Revolutionary War, recognizing the threat that American settlers posed to native lands. On November 15th, 1789, representatives from the national government, North and South Carolina, the Creeks, and the Cherokees planned to meet to discuss the controversial treaties signed between 1783 and 1789 and to negotiate a new treaty. Washington had to select the representatives to send on behalf of the federal government, another important first for the new president. At his August 22nd meeting, Washington planned to seek advice about what instructions he should give to the commissioners. Because he considered Native American relations to fall under the heading of foreign policy, he followed the constitutional guidelines calling for him with the Senate. On May 25th, 1789, less than a month after his inauguration, Washington sent to the Senate all of the United States' previous treaties with Indian nations, along with a number of supporting documents. After a brief discussion, the Senate postponed its consideration of these papers. At the beginning of August, the Senate created a committee to meet with Washington. That committee planned the minute details of the upcoming meeting, down to where Washington would sit and how he would enter the chamber. On August 20 and 21, Washington nominated commissioners to negotiate with the Southern Indians. On August 21st, he sent an official note to the Senate announcing his visit the next day to discuss the terms of the proposed treaty. When Washington and Knox arrived at Federal Hall at 11:30 a.m., the doorkeeper announced their arrival. Washington sat at the front of the chamber, and Knox took the chair to the right. Washington handed his remarks to Knox, who in turn handed them to Vice President John Adams. Adams read the statement, but as Senator William McClay from Pennsylvania recalled, the senator, quote, could not master one sentence of it, end quote. Adams was not known for his public speaking skills, but the senator's struggles weren't entirely his fault. The Senate gathered for their work in the large chamber that occupied the first floor of Federal Hall. Because of the August heat in New York City, the doorkeeper had opened the windows in search of a cooling breeze. But along with fresh air, noisy Wall Street's pedestrians, carriages, peddlers, and horses flowed into the Senate chamber. The clamor overpowered Adams' voice, so few senators could make out the words that Washington had so carefully crafted. After a few complaints, Adams repeated the speech from the beginning. Washington's remarks offered a brief synopsis of the current diplomatic state between the United States and the Southern Indians and posed 7 questions for the Senate to answer with an aye or a no. Adams finished his recitation and sat. The seconds ticked by as the senators remained in awkward silence. A few shuffled papers or cleared their throats. Maclay speculated in his diary that his colleagues were so intimidated by Washington's presence in the Senate chamber that they cowered in shameful silence. Eager to show that they could be active participants in the creation of foreign policy, Maclay stood up and suggested referring the Washington's 7 questions to committee for discussion in detail. Washington then lost his temper, stood out at, "This defeats every purpose of my coming here." The senators fell into a stunned hush before Washington acquiesced to Maclay's suggestion and offered to return to the Senate a few days later. Although he did not return to the following Monday, his first visit to the Senate was an inauspicious the executive legislative relationship. The book is The Cabinet by Leslie M. Chervinsky. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Are you feeling sad and depressed? Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, listlessness, disenfranchisement, isolation, loss of identity, self-loathing, feelings of guilt, loss of free speech, incarceration, fines, suicidal thoughts, death, or revolution. Now, that's kind of the funny one, but the serious thing is that capitalism, unregulated capitalism, unrestrained, laissez-faire, neoliberal capitalism, no income tax capitalism, no regulation capitalism, does produce this kind of a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to, and you know, thank goodness we are moving in the right direction, I think, back toward regulated capitalism like Franklin Roosevelt gave us, rather than the unregulated neoliberal capitalism of the Trump years. I got a video about this over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. Tag you're it. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. On the line with us is our old buddy Kevin Kamps. He is the radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, beyondnuclear.org, of course, the website, and Beyond Nuclear, also the Twitter handle. And Kevin, I'm looking at this piece in today's New York Times by David Sanger and William Broad, titled "Russia's Small Nuclear Arms: A Risky Option for Putin and Ukraine Alike." And they point out that we created this 70-pound bomb. They called it the Davy Crockett. Back in the day, it had about 1,000th of the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. There are some, according to the New York Times, there are some of these strategic nuclear weapons who are about 1/3 of the Hiroshima bombs. That's their smallest, their Iskander payload. It's and the Hiroshima bomb was 15 to 19 kilotons. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so they're smaller than that, but they also have a bunch of them that are larger than that. What's the deal here with these so-called tactical nuclear weapons, and what would the consequences be of one having, being exploded somewhere over Ukraine?
Well, like you said, Hiroshima was around 15 kilotons. That's 15,000 tons of TNT dynamite. So even 1,000th of that is still 15 tons of dynamite, which can take out maybe not an entire city downtown like at Hiroshima, but some blocks of a city and kill all the people in those blocks. There's also the radioactivity that's generated in that microsecond of nuclear fission. That's going to be deadly fallout forever into the future. And, like you said, there's a spectrum of sizes that goes all the way from 1,000th of a Hiroshima bomb to sometimes tens or even hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. They're still considered tactical or battlefield only because the strategic nuclear weapons these days are, you know, a megaton, 1 million tons. Some are hundreds of tons. So the size of the blast is going to determine how many people are killed, how much of a city is destroyed. But the radioactive fallout will also have to do with how much nuclear material is in the pits of these weapons. But it's nothing compared to the radioactivity at a nuclear power plant, for example, in the cores of reactors in the high-level radioactive waste storage pools.
Right. So we saw, I mean, you know, the fans of nuclear power are running around saying, well, you know, only a few people died from, Chernobyl, and nobody died from Fukushima, and, you know, quack, quack, quack. I mean, you've knocked down those myths, and feel free to do that again right now in short form. But how would a nuclear, well, just, you know, what would the consequences be of a nuclear weapon going off in Ukraine?
Well, you'd kill all the people within a certain radius of the blast. You'd also have the fallout that would then blow with the wind and flow with the water and contaminate the drinking water supply, the food supply. So those would be the blast and radiological consequences of a nuclear weapons use in Ukraine. Right. Just one. Right. There's also the escalation that it would likely lead to with larger and larger nuclear weapons maybe being deployed on either side. I mean, the U.S. and NATO have 100 pre-deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, but the Russians have 1,000 to 2,000, and that's just the tactical. And then there's the strategic, which between the U.S. and Russia, that's more than 90% of the nuclear weapons in the world. And the rest are in certain, you know, NATO allied countries like France and the U.K., and then perhaps you could say certain Russian allied countries like China, for example.
Right, right. And now I heard this morning on NPR is that Russia has, or that Putin has ordered his people to seize one of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Did you catch that?
Yeah, that's the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia province, which Russia now claims as Russian territory. And they've had it, they seized it militarily in early March in the first days of the invasion. They've held it ever since, but the Ukrainian workforce is still there. And another recent development was last weekend, the director of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, who is Ukrainian, was detained, arrested, and held incognito by the Russian military. He's since been released. He's fled to Ukrainian-controlled territory with his family. But, I mean, that's what I was getting at was you've got 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia. You have the high-level radioactive waste storage pools. So instead of pounds of nuclear material in a tactical nuclear weapon, that's what forms the radioactive fallout that you worry about when one of those explodes. Not pounds. We're talking hundreds of tons of nuclear material in operating reactor cores. You're talking about thousands of tons of high-level radioactive waste in those storage pools, in the dry cask storage. The fallout from explosions and fires at a nuclear power plant would dwarf nuclear weaponry in terms of how much radioactivity would be released into the environment to hurt people.
Is there concern that Zaporizhzhia and any of the other nuclear power plants in Ukraine, I understand they have a number of them, are at risk for this sort of thing? I mean, it was the Russians seizing the plant maybe a good thing because it stabilized, you know, the fighting in the area, or is it a bad thing because they don't know what the hell they're doing and it's setting up another Chernobyl or something like that?
Very bad thing. I mean, the initial military seizure was highly risky. The Ukrainian workforce was warning over the loudspeakers on site, please stop firing at us. This is a nuclear power plant. That was just the beginning. Now, for the past several long weeks, there have been almost daily shelling of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or its vicinity. It's lost connection to the grid. It's been thrown onto emergency diesel generators. Every one of these is a game of chicken, risking a nuclear catastrophe that would dwarf Chernobyl. There's 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia. 1 reactor exploded and burned at Chernobyl. There are 6 at Zaporizhzhia. There are the high-level radioactive waste storage pools, which would be a mega catastrophe. Another nuclear power plant implicated recently was the South Ukraine nuclear power plant near Mykolaiv, which had Russian missiles strike within 900 feet of the 3 reactors there. So we're dodging radioactive bullets. It's hard to exaggerate how bad it would be if one of these reactors, one of these pools, were blown up or set on fire.
Wow. Well, I guess when Ukraine gets rebuilt, rebuilding solar and wind would be a good idea. Kevin Kamps is the radioactive waste specialist with Beyond Nuclear. BeyondNuclear.org is the website, and Beyond Nuclear is the Twitter handle. Kevin, thank you for dropping by. It's always informative speaking with you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Appreciate it. We'll be right back. I'll pick up your phone calls here. We've got a lot to talk about. What do we do about Saudi Arabia? What do we do about nuclear power? What do we do with Ukraine? How should Democrats respond to Republican fear-mongering in their advertising? There's a pile of stuff on the table.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Are you sensing the political winds shifting? And if so, in what direction in your area where you live? We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. And let's see here. Joan in Stanwood, Washington. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I have been a long-time listener, and this is the first time I've actually talked to you. I am hoping that every one of your listeners will call their congresspeople today. And to tell them that the Democrats have to go on the offensive for crime and tie it to guns and the Republicans. And then they need to go after morals and ask them if they have ever read a Bible, and that the Republicans are against everything in the Bible. And then for inflation, just the corporations and the gas are all the Republicans, and they have to just go after the fact that Trump did this, back when the first gas price went up, and to explain that that's what's happening. And then for children, I'm sorry, I've been outside panting.
Okay.
Children, they hate them after birth because now that's the number one, gun deaths is the number one cause of death in children. Right. So catch them on their lies. And then the coup de grace is to have everybody make up signs to hand out to the homeless that say Ronald Reagan / Republican retirement plan to put in front of their homeless.
They back in the 30s they were calling and in the late 20s, 29, 30, 31, 32, they were calling these homeless tents, these little homeless cities, Hoovervilles.
Right.
And, in memory of President Herbert Hoover, who crashed the economy in 29, the Republican president, maybe we should call these Reaganvilles.
Yes. Or just I think the retirement plan would wake people up. Say, this is the Republican retirement plan.
Well, it's the Republican housing plan, too.
Yeah, well, okay, do both. But we have to call everybody or do it ourselves. I mean, we have to. I mean, if everybody listening to you made 10 of those signs and handed it out to the homeless people, I suspect they would display them.
Well, I don't know, and I don't know how risky or effective that may be, but I do think that your first point, and that is going after Republicans on crime by using guns.
Yes.
Republicans have washed this country in blood. The number one cause of death among children is guns. The Republicans have worked as hard as they can to have as many guns as possible in the United States, and the result of that is an ocean of blood from coast to coast. And it's time to stop this Republican crime wave, this Republican gun-associated crime wave.
So if everybody called their congresspeople and tell them to make those ads,
yeah, well,
what has to happen? Somebody has to make those ads.
Yeah.
Or however you get into their PACs. I don't know how.
And the other thing is the Republicans are totally in favor of white collar crime. They don't want the IRS funded to go after white collar criminals.
Yeah.
And the white collar criminals are ripping us off left and right, and the Republicans are right there with them. So it's
exactly.
Joan, yeah, good.
We have to go after our people to get tougher. They're just they're playing victim.
Good points, all. Joan, thank you for the call. It is 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Welcome back. 47 minutes past the hour. George in Parksville, New York. Hey, George. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Thank you for taking my call. Lifetime Democrat who will be voting Republican for the first time in his life this year.
Because?
My 89-year-old father was a victim of a violent home invasion 2 months ago. He was beaten very, very badly, had his jaw broke, and the 4 young men that broke into his home were all released without bail.
Wow. See, it's wrong.
They objected to counting electoral votes.
Well, there was one person who objected, yeah, but it wasn't 147, Greg. It definitely was not 147. Lee, in fact, it was Pramila Jayapal. Lee in New York City. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I've listened to you a long time. This is the first time I called you.
Thank you.
So, yeah. And so, look, help me understand. The Republicans are against inflation, right?
Well,
yet they plan to cut Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. They're ready to take money out of the economy. How's that work? And why isn't that like the third most important thing that these Democrats are talking about?
Yeah. Abortion,
the democracy, and Social Security. This is pretty easy. This is a layup for the Democrats.
Yeah.
Okay.
This election was the Democrats to walk away with. The big problem, one of the biggest problems, is all this dark money that's flowing in. I mean, Mitch McConnell has virtually unlimited money, and he's running these very deceptive ads that are racial dog whistles, frankly, in state after state on these Senate races, and they are moving the needle significantly. You've seen now Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, both of them heavily leaning Democratic, now flipping to toss-up states. These ads are moving people. So,
well, the Democrats have to get aggressive too.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, come on. We're in a boxing match.
Yeah.
Throw some punches.
I'm with you. I'm with
you.
This
is pretty easy. This is pretty easy. The wait till November and say, oh, we lost. How you lose this?
Yeah.
If you reverse this, and this was Republicans, if a Democrat had a Herschel Walker and the guy in Pennsylvania, Senate runner, all these low value candidates, they would walk away with this.
You would think.
And the Democrat is always acting impotent.
Well, the other problem is the Democrats are very committed, generally speaking, to telling the truth in their advertising, and the Republicans are literally just lying. They're out there running ads that are filled with lies. Herschel Walker's got an ad right now that says that Reverend Warnock defunded the police. Reverend Warnock was never even in a position to have any control over the funding of police. He went from being the pastor of a church to being a senator, and the Senate doesn't control police salaries. And it's just a naked lie. And they're getting away with it. Lee, I got to move along, but
Tom,
thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you.
But Tom, all the Democrats do tell the truth.
Yeah, there you go. Tell the truth. It's Harry Truman. They say I'm giving them hell, but I'm just telling the truth, and they think it's hell. Amen. Thank you, Lee. Greg in Steilacoom, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good morning. I wanted to get your insight on this. The January 6th insurrection had all the trappings of a highly orchestrated military operation. If you just look at the construct of a military operations order, you have missions, you have command and control, you have signal, you have logistics, and you also have these different phase lines. And it kind of strikes me that one of the phase lines that they were hoping for was that the vice president was going to side with Trump, and that failed. Right. So the next thing would be in this phase line would be you have to create something that enforces the Insurrection Act and thereby martial law. And I think that there has to be a dotted line that is going to Russia and how they invaded the missing nuclear document. Are we going to see something here in the future with these January 6th hearings where the dots are connected? Because it sure looks like that we have a plan in place that failed, and Putin had to react. And of course, we know Trump didn't provide him the military armament that he needed, and I don't think there would have been a chance that he would have ever gotten any of that if Trump had been in power. So it just there seems to be a gap there that it's closing, and I wonder if it is closed, could Trump be considered a war criminal?
Well, I think he could probably be considered a Russian agent, although, particularly when you go back and look at the Mueller report, 10 different examples of his obstructing justice, trying to basically hide his association with Russian money and Russian attempts to swing successful Russian attempts to swing the election in his favor. Whether the January 6th operation had any connection to Russia, I don't know, and I haven't seen any evidence of that. But I do agree with you, Greg. This was a military operation. These people were not playing games. They were playing for keeps. They were trying to overthrow the government of the United States and turn this country into a fascist dictatorship. And they damn near succeeded. And Donald Trump was leading the charge. And
there's only one guy, in my opinion, that could have choreographed that with the level of expertise, and that would have been Flynn. Having worked with, senior officers in the military and operational planning.
Well, they had a bunch of ex-military, Greg. I mean, that's the whole Oath Keepers thing is, you've got to be somebody who swore an oath to the United States. In other words, a cop or a former military. But, Greg, right. I want to get one more call in here, but I get your point. Your point is very well made. Richard in Underwood, Iowa. Richard, you're on the air.
Okay. A few weeks ago, I think it was, the lady from Brandcroft, Iowa, or Nebraska, called in and said that what has the Democrats done for farmers.
Right.
And I got a little list here. I'll try to go fast. First thing that they did, we took the farmers off welfare. Trump, and she didn't like Trump, so I'll say the other guy. Put farmers on welfare with a commodity expansion program because he cut markets all over the world. The second thing we did open up markets in Indonesia and in South Korea and Japan. And Biden has even got China to come back and start buying grain from the United States. The price of corn, if she would look, the price of soybeans has gone up from when Trump took office, or the other guy took office, it was $6.75. It went down to under $4. And today, Biden has got us at $16 plus per bushel.
So your bottom line here, Richard, is that Democrats have been good for farmers in the United States, and people in rural America should know it.
They have been very good for farmers. I read a piece from yesterday telling about how farmers have always prospered under Democrats and always lost money under Republicans.
That's interesting.
The conservation programs have just been implemented that will help clean up water. And in Iowa, our water is 80% of our water is contaminated. We have places that we go into that have brain-eating amoeba in the water.
Wow.
And we can't, and we got to keep people out.
Is this from ag runoff and stuff?
That's right.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Richard, thank you for the call, and thanks for the information about, farmers in Iowa. Ali Velshi is going to drop by on the other side of the break. We'll hear the latest from the hurricane and Ukraine, his thoughts on those issues. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we We have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s. the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our buddy Ali Velshi, the host of MSNBC's Velshi on weekend mornings. You can tweet him at Ali Velshi, A-L-I-V-E-L-S-H-I. And Ali, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering your thoughts on Joe Biden yesterday, kind of throwing shade on Ron DeSantis, or maybe not, I don't know, saying, it's a fine thing that he has finally decided to accept climate change.
Yeah, it's a little bit of shade, and I'm actually surprised, Tom, because I've been covering hurricanes for 20 years, and I was down there for this one, and every time I talk about it, increasingly in recent years, I very deliberately bring up climate change. We book segments on it, and we discuss it. And we discuss the real ways in which these hurricanes are exacerbated by climate change, by wind changes, by warmer water, by higher water levels. I mean, that's just all plain science. And then the larger issues around climate change and where people live and why poor people live in places that are more susceptible to it. And I still get pushback, right? It's like when you, after a mass shooting, when you talked about gun control, people would say, this isn't the time to talk about it. And I used to think it's exactly the time to talk about it, right? This is when it's central, it's in the news. And I feel the same way about hurricanes. I'm always fascinated, and even in 2022, at the degree of pushback that people provide in terms of not, this isn't that, and don't talk about that, and this is a human disaster, and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that Ron DeSantis finds himself increasingly as a guy who's trying to be a Donald Trump redux in a difficult position on this one, because he's got a lot of people, including at a network across the road from me, who really just don't want to have this discussion around climate change and don't want to realize the reality of it. But if we don't realize the reality of it, we don't do the protective things that we need to do. We don't build properly. We don't relocate people properly. In the case of Lee County, Florida, which is where Fort Myers is, we didn't move the people out who needed help being moved out. So now we have 100 people dead at least. This could actually be one of the most deadly storms in Florida history. So I really am puzzled by the disconnect between the discussions about climate change and hurricanes. I understand hurricanes have been going on for millions of years. They will go on, and they would have gone on regardless of climate change. But the intensity, the danger, and the flooding, which is what killed most of these people, is exacerbated by climate change. End of story. It's not even a debatable matter.
Well, let me simplify it for you. There is only one political party in the world, or at least in the developed world, that continues to deny climate change. That's the Republican Party in the United States. And the Republican Party in the United States has much of the political power that it has right now as a consequence of billions of dollars that have been spent over the last 40 or 50 years by billionaires who made their money on fossil fuels. Not just the Koch brothers, but
Yep, you're absolutely right.
And the Republicans know who's buttering their bread. They know where the money is coming from, and they don't want it to stop. And and these fossil fuel billionaires, they want to continue to poison the planet and make more money.
And I don't get how it gets so far beyond that, though. I had several conversations about this on TV last week, including one with Joy Reid, which sort of connected the idea of climate with refugees, right? With migrants. Yeah. And climate will soon be the single biggest reason why people move around the world. And even with the refugees from North Africa a few years back, a lot of that is climate. They come from places that are drought.
This is what we're getting right now from Guatemala. We're getting subsistence farmers who've been driven off their farms by climate change.
Totally right. Now, are there other issues? Absolutely. But climate is central. And so we were having this conversation, and I had to write this down because I was so fascinated by it. I was in the middle of a storm. I couldn't hear it when it was said live. But Tucker Carlson had a bit of a meltdown around this and said, quote, imagine taking a science lecture from someone as stupid as Stephanie Ruhle or Ali Velshi. On that point, it's ridiculous. It's unseemly and anti-human. People are dying. So wait just a moment before putting forward your demands for more political power.
Spoken like Charlton Heston, right? Or Wayne LaPierre.
The reason I care about climate change in the instance of a hurricane is the same reason I care about gun control in the instance of a mass shooting. If you did X, Y might not have happened, or Y might have had a different result, right? It's a direct correlation. Yeah. As we have said, this was a big hurricane, 150 miles per hour winds. That's a serious hurricane. But most people died of flooding. Most people died from storm surge because we measure hurricanes by wind, and we don't often think about, we don't have a measurement for the flooding part. Flooding happens in places that are prone to flooding. And much of Florida is prone to flooding. And when I was around, we talk about Sanibel Island a lot. Everybody was always talking about where's Sanibel Island, what's happened on Sanibel Island, where are the people who left, who's there. Let's take a look at the video of the damage. People I saw weren't in Sanibel Island. They were shrimp fishermen who, by the way, are at the low end of the income scale for anybody who fishes for a living. They had lost their boats, they had lost their IDs, they had lost their money, they had lost their sleeping quarters. They had no help. I remember asking one guy, I said, at least are the boats insured? And he said, absolutely not. He said, price of gas is up, price of shrimp is low. If I make $25,000 a year, that would be a great year for me. And he said, I don't mind that we need to help the people in Sanibel Island too, but nobody knows that we are even here. They didn't have toilets, they didn't have food, they didn't have power for their cell phones, they didn't know where to go. They were a mile from help, but they couldn't get it. And that's the kind of reason those people are subject to all this BS that you and I are talking about, all this nonsense about how it's not climate change. Climate change involves realizing people, particularly poor people, live in areas that are prone to this sort of destruction. So we need to think about them. When we talk about climate justice, it's not an abstraction. It's the idea that there are people who are disproportionately affected by climate change. Until you actually start talking about climate change properly, we're not going to get to the part about people disproportionately affected by it. And we need to get there now because many of those are the people who died.
I wanted to ask you about Ukraine. We're talking with Ali Velshi. You've spent a fair amount of time in Ukraine and, reporting from there. I know you have contacts there and sources there. And Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I mean, I think the implicit threat was not that he was going to nuke New York City, but that he was talking about tactical battlefield nukes. And we're seeing now as the Ukrainians are sweeping into some of these formerly Russian-held regions that there are no civilians left. They've been either killed or put on buses and sent into the hinterlands of Russia. Apparently Russia's got hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that they're essentially holding as hostages, and a lot of the children have already been sold into the Russian black market for children, whether it's adoption or whatever it may be, God, forbid. And so the Ukrainian soldiers are coming into these areas that have been basically sterilized, and the Russians have fled. And it seems to me like having a whole lot of soldiers and not a lot of civilians in an area that's basically just a wasteland to begin with is the perfect target for Vlad to throw a nuke at. Am I missing something here?
So the calculation, and nobody knows what's in Vladimir Putin's mind, but it's several-fold, right? First of all, is the nuclear weapon going to be tactical in a small way? And the smallest nuclear weapon they've got is about 0.3 of a kiloton or something, or big. Is it tactical, meaning you do what you just described, or is it demonstrative, right? Is it the idea that we will use them?
A terror attack, basically.
Correct. They also know that winds blow, so they don't want the winds blowing into Belarus. They don't want the winds blowing into Russia. And by the way, Joe Biden said the other day, you do anything with NATO and you're in big trouble, which he knows. Mm-hmm. So you don't even want the winds blowing into NATO countries, because that could be an attack. So he's got to figure out what kind of weapon, what's the purpose, and will it be a deterrent? Will it be a, guys, we're serious, we've got nuclear weapons? The problem with nuclear weapons, because one has not been used in this fashion in 77 years or something, is that once you use it, you lose your political value of threatening to use it all the time. So you got to think, is Vladimir Putin, is he done? Does he think he's done? Does he think he's lost this war and maybe his political power? And then maybe he doesn't care if the world goes up in a nuclear plume? Or is he still strategic enough to realize that even a little small tactical weapon into a generally sparsely populated place that may just have Ukrainian soldiers in it may be a bridge too far? And nobody knows what the answer is to this one. But the good news is that Russia's losing the war. The bad news right now, Tom, is that Russia's losing the war.
Right. The cornered rats are the most dangerous,
yeah.
and that's the era that we have reached. Ali Velshi, host of MSNBC's Velshi on weekend mornings and popping up on the network all over the place. I see you constantly. Ali Velshi on Twitter. Ali, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's always great talking
to you again, Tom.
Back at you. We'll be back. We'll continue the program here. I want to get into a geeky science about coral reefs, and we got your calls. And boy, we covered a lot of territory from Fetterman to nukes.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What are the Democrats going to do about crime? Are white supremacy and wealth the only thing oligarchs are interested in? On goes the narrative here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was going back to when they were talking about defund the police, but you've been past that a while. But I used to watch a program, and you probably know who the program was, back in the early 2000s from Texas. And in one of the programs that they had was they showed the military in a Minneapolis police station teaching the local police how to use weapons, lasers. They supplied with tanks. And my understanding is the police force is the people to watch their lives and make sure everything is right. And the Army has no business, I don't believe, trying to teach our policemen how to counteract their own people in their cities. And I think that's a travesty, and defunding police comes from the fact that they've been taught a lot more of things that are not kind and good for the people than they were years ago. And so I think the military needs to be the military and then let the police alone and not be teaching them other tactics. We've got enough going on now without giving these guys who are out there every day trying to help you and me, and then have the military come and tell them what to do.
Yeah, and it's not just teaching them tactics, Joan. It's giving them equipment. This was Ronald Reagan's great innovation. Was the military-industrial complex came to him and, hey, there's the military buys stuff from us, and then we've got new stuff that's coming out, and we really want them to buy the new stuff, but the old stuff still works. So let's give them an opportunity to pass the old stuff on to the police departments. And
well, the police department doesn't need that kind of weapons towards me. I worked with women whose husbands, who I would not have wanted to be in their lives, watching their husbands go out every day and put their lives on the line for you and me, and then tell other people they should be defunded because our military has gone in and tried to militarize them instead of keeping them the police force of the people are there to help us. And that needs to be changed. And I think there's a lot of things that show up that don't come to the forefront, and that's one of them. And I'm really unhappy, and they should say maybe re-educate or teach them new things, but not defund anybody that's out there helping you and me and our kids every day when they're out in the streets.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken, Joan, and particularly the distinction between the military, which does like occupation of hostile countries, and you know, the military is basically, I mean, the joke that they talk about in basic training is, you know, you're being taught to blow up things and kill people.
That's right.
And policing is supposed to be serving people and protecting people, which is a very different thing from blowing things up and killing people. And this Reagan-era policy, which has not been reversed, it continues to be very profitable to the military-industrial complex, which is why it has not been reversed. The military-industrial complex has factories, you know, weapons and munitions factories, literally in every congressional district in America. And, you know, until that ends, or until that, you know, there's some control over that, they're going to continue selling this stuff to our police and militarizing our police. And now every small town's got a SWAT team and a tank and a half track. And I mean, it's like, you know, the occupying army. It was amazing to see this, you know, how this played out here in the summer of 2020 here in Portland. It was just breathtaking. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Welcome back. Hey, geeky science for you. Researchers from Louisiana State University, Rice University, and the University of Colorado at Boulder are concerned about what they describe as ominous threats, in quotes, that ocean acidification and warming pose to coral reefs in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. Apparently, there's some really major reefs down there. The Flower Garden banks, the reefs off the coast of Cuba, other parts of the Caribbean, really high coral cover. And they're saying that global warming is killing this coral, not to mention pollution. But the big concern is warming, that these areas are seeing warming waters that are so warm that they're stressing the coral and killing the coral 2, 3, 4 months out of the year. And they're saying that if this warming continues within the next 30 years, it's going to be 10 months out of the year that they're going to see this kind of, and which will bleach the coral. It'll kill the coral. Coral is made up of little tiny living animals, and the coral itself is their exoskeleton, their external skeleton that protects them, and they live in this coral, sort of like snails in their shells. And these animals cannot survive the acid and the heat that comes along with global warming. The areas examined by the researchers, quote, contain more than 10% of the world's reef and host hundreds of fish species, provide more than $6 billion in economic benefits through fisheries, tourism, and other ecosystem services. And on average, live coral now covers less than 10% of the surface of most reefs in the region as a result of this. They also note that the COP27 meeting, the next meeting about global climate change that'll be kicked off by the United Nations, is going to start next month in Egypt. So keep an eye on that. You know, big things coming. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Bill in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. What's on? What's on your
Okay,
mind?
great. Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Now that Russia, I think, has met most of its objectives in their Ukraine operation, I'm now beginning to think and wonder when they'll start, possibly striking military supply transit routes in Poland and maybe possibly other European countries that are currently sending weapons into Western Ukraine. And I really got to wondering about this because it was mentioned by a Senator Marco Rubio in a recent talk show. I wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, Poland is part of NATO. I mean, if Russia was to throw a missile into Poland, all hell would break loose. So I think that's extremely unlikely. What isn't extremely unlikely is that they might send saboteurs in to do terror attacks in Poland, blow things up, or that, this conversation I just had with Ali about, the possibility of nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine. These are large and substantial and legitimate concerns, frankly, that I think we all need to be paying attention to. Bill, thanks for the call. Yep. Nancy in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's great to speak with you again.
Thank you.
I was just thinking about the exportation of the gas and oil and to ban it. Let's just call it America First.
Yeah, there you go. It should be.
Take their mantra and say, hey, look, America, this is in our best interest. America First.
Yep.
And we got to do it.
Yep.
And we got to cut the subsidies, too.
I'm with you.
Guys.
I'm with you. We're subsidizing this fossil fuel industry worldwide to the tune of $600 billion a year. It's about $50 billion a year here in the United States. And it's nuts. It's nuts that we're pouring money into the fossil fuel.
There's got to be a reason why Democrats won't do it, why he won't just do it.
Yeah.
I mean, are we so in on it that...
The reason is Citizens United. There is so much money sloshing around, and and frankly, a lot of the subsidies that we're providing to the fossil fuel industry take the form of tax things, like the oil appreciation allowance. And once you start messing with tax law, you have opened a massive can of worms. But I'm with you. It's time to say enough is enough. Thank you, Nancy. Dan in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. This OPEC trying to get the price up on oil, to me, that sounds like the dumbest business decision ever. When your product is already on the way out, wouldn't you want it? I'd want everybody buying as much gas and having their heat on with the windows open. It just kind of seems like you're raising the price. Everybody's trying to get solar panels and electric cars.
There's a good case to be made that Saudi Arabia does not have the oil reserves that the world thinks they do. That actually, the so-called second largest oil reserves in the world are in Iraq, but they may actually be the largest. That Saudi Arabia has been draining this oil pool for a long, long time. It's starting to get expensive for them, and they may not be a major source of oil for the world in 20 or 30 years. So get while the getting's good seems to be the thinking there.
I always thought one day they'd be living in their diamond Lamborghinis.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the reasons why many of the Gulf states are switching to solar powers like there's no tomorrow. I mean, this is a huge trend now, and they've got all the fossil fuels in the world, but Oop, Dan, I'm sorry, I thought you were done there. But this number one. We need to say no more, the refineries in the United States may no longer export gasoline. We have a gasoline shortage in the United States, evidenced by the price. And if they're going to say, no, there's no shortage, well, then lower the damn price. So we've got a gas shortage in the United States, so stop the export of gasoline, number one. Number two, stop the export of fossil fuels. Number three, cut off Saudi Arabia from all military weaponry and spare parts. I realize that the defense contractors are going to scream, tough luck, and the UAE. And then, let's take a serious look at how much money it's going to take and how long it's going to take to massively solarize and windize the United States.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Because when you're an addict, the pusher has all the power. And in this case, the pusher is not a good man. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your calls. Brian in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, what's going on? Thanks for having me. I just want to say how refreshing it is to hear you say that we need to get off of Saudi oil completely, and how awesome it is that the Biden administration is willing to ease sanctions on Venezuela in order to get, their oil and kind of help us through these times. I've been screaming for years that we just need to get over it. They do democracy a little different in Latin America, but they still have the decency to have a democracy, and it's much more valuable to align ourselves with them instead of these despots across the globe who don't even have the decency to pretend they believe in democracy.
Right, like Saudi Arabia. I'm with you, Brian. And, I'm not sure I would call Venezuela in its current state a democratic country, but still, all... It's a little different.
They do a little differently down there, but they have the decency to pretend.
Yeah, I got it. But my point is that all sanctions do, historically, is cause leaders within countries to become stronger. We sanctioned Cuba. What happened? Castro took stronger control. We sanctioned Iran. What happened? The mullahs took stronger control. What it does is it defines us for the population of that country as the external enemy, and it causes a rally around the flag effect. And Obama opened up Cuba and said, okay, let's work with, and Luis and I went down there and spent a week down there in Havana and traveled around the country and everything. And the Castro government, at that time, it was no longer Castro, but the government was making major changes. Opening up in really significant, and then Trump comes along and goes, oh, no, we're going to shut that down again. It's nuts. And so, opening to Venezuela, I think, is an important thing. And the penny should have dropped when Ron DeSantis flew 50 Venezuelan refugees from Texas to Martha's Vineyard. Why Venezuela? Because we have just created economic chaos in that country with our embargo. And it's not hurting the rich people in that country. It never hurts the rich people. It hurts everybody else. And thus we get the refugees. Brian, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Morning, Tom. Regarding the whole crime advertising from the Republicans, we got to flip the script. We got to remind America that Republicans have spent 40 years defunding America. What causes crime is poverty, a shrinking middle class, and like your book says, Reaganomics strangled the middle class. So I think that could be a basis for
that's an excellent point.
Ziggy bumper sticker, and for every politician and the DNC, if you're listening, that's the key line.
Reagan defunded America. Defunding America causes crime.
Yeah, well, Reagan, Republicans. Let's keep it current and
Republicans
with the elections. Republicans defunded America for 40 years. Yep. Republicans have defunded America, defunded our schools. Less education means higher crime. More poverty means higher crime.
Excellent, Rich. Excellent.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Great bumper stickers. Michael in Rock Hall, Maryland. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was thinking,
following the line of thought of the previous caller, I was thinking maybe we should try addressing crime from a perspective of social justice. I mean, so many of the victims of crime who you don't really seem to hear about in, the fear-mongering, they come from really disadvantaged backgrounds. Nobody cares about them because the media is so busy covering, jewel theft.
Yeah, most of the victims of crime in America actually are the very poor.
Yeah, a lot of them are poor. A lot of them are homeless. A lot of them are from ethnic minorities.
Yep.
And what's more, I mean, the GOP, they have cut funding to all sorts of social programs. They've pushed the narrative that government should be run on a shoestring budget, and they have prevented police from being held accountable. I mean, nobody will respect the law in a country where police engage in such misconduct, where social issues are completely ignored and the rich are seen as free to do whatever they want, and in a place where there aren't we don't even have the funds to hire enough police officers in the places that need them, and to hold them accountable so people respect the law enforcement.
Yep. I'm completely with you. 2-3 months ago, we had Jamie Harrison, the head of the DNC, on this program, and I said to him words to the effect of, "They're going to come after you on crime. I guarantee it. Are you guys ready? What are you going to do?" And I don't, Sean was checking the clip a little earlier. I don't recall him giving me any kind of a clear answer. I don't think the Democrats saw this coming. And I'm just shocked by it because there's been a bunch of us out here who have been saying, this is coming, this is what they do. Nixon did it, Reagan did it, Bush did it, Bush did it, and now Trump did it, and now they're going to do it again. Michael, thank you. Well, very, very, very well said. Tim in Hokum, Wisconsin. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't know why, but this war in Ukraine, no one ever mentions the fact that the Donbass region holds 70% of Ukraine's gas and oil.
Right, and other mineral wealth. Yes.
That's never brought up in any of the news stations or anything. And of course, Putin being other than being a murderous thug, he's also an oil.
He's a petrobillionaire.
Whatever you want to call him. Yeah, and so he's after that. And and there's this whole problem is oil. Like the Iran nuclear agreement, we got out of that, but no one ever talks about the consequences of that. And that was when the sanctions got put back on Iran, it stopped them from selling their oil on the world market, and they couldn't use oil or world banking anymore.
Right. Yeah, they started selling to North Korea because that's all they could do. Yeah.
But the oil coming out of but who did this benefit? This benefited the oil companies like ExxonMobil that was taking oil out of the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so
was Rex Tillerson the Secretary of State when we blew up the JCPOA? I don't recall.
Pardon me?
Was Rex Tillerson the Secretary of State when we took down the Iran nuclear deal?
Yes.
Huh. Yeah, because I don't recall which secretary. Trump had so many of them.
He was the first. They did it right away at the beginning.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things they did.
So here we have the former chairman or the former CEO of ExxonMobil making a decision that massively helps ExxonMobil and screws the United States.
Yes, exactly. That never came out at all. It was just like, Trump made this decision, or Tillerson and them made the decision, and they said, so what? We didn't like it.
Yeah.
And then you have on an evening news, you'll have Carrier Strike Force leaves for the Persian Gulf to safeguard American interests in the Middle East. Well, what are our interests in the Middle East that they got to safeguard with an aircraft carrier?
Right.
Now, an aircraft carrier underway costs us $1.4 million every day to run that one ship.
I'm surprised it's that little.
But there's now 20 little ships around it.
Yeah.
You ever seen one of those strike forces?
Yeah.
So we're paying probably $6-7 million a day to send that over there to safeguard American interests.
Yeah, not to mention the salaries of the soldiers and all the cost of everything else. This is part of our subsidy for the oil industry and for Saudi Arabia, and we need to stop subsidizing them. We can produce enough fossil fuels in the United States to meet 100% of our needs right now, and we were in 2015. In the last 2 years of the Obama administration. And what happened? The Congress passed a law saying, well, now we're going to let the oil industry just, screw America with regard to fossil fuels. And now you've got, this massive increase in exports of gasoline, of refined oil. We drill it in the United States. We refine it here. All the poison from the refining goes into the air here in the United States and kills people in Cancer Alley in Texas and Louisiana and down the Gulf Coast. And so we get the pollution, we get the fracking waste, we get all the poisons, and we're selling the gasoline to other countries. This is not government policy, by the way. This is the oil industry policy. And we need to stop it.
That's global, because they're global companies.
Of course they are. They have no obligation to the United States. You're absolutely right.
No, they don't.
Yeah, they don't give a rat's ass about the United States except as a market. And as long as they can keep us addicted, they're going to do it.
And they use our military as a security means in the Middle East.
You're absolutely right.
They're oil tankers, so their oil tankers can go to Japan or South Korea or wherever. And so we're paying for this at multi-million dollars a day.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's wrong. Tim, thank you very much. We need to open Venezuela to oil. We need to end our military relationship with Saudi Arabia. And we need to stop the exports of fossil fuels from the United States. Very straightforward stuff. And basically, it's just undoing bad policy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's going to be 45 minutes past the hour in a few seconds. We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. And welcome back. Jim in Canadian Lakes, Michigan. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, I was calling about the pollution problem we're having with the oil industry, gas industry, methane and benzene, toluene, all that nasty stuff. Well, 1,000 people die in America a day from air pollution. And when you add that up, that's 365,000, roughly a million every 3 years. And as far as clean energy is concerned and loss of life with hurricanes are like tiny percentage of that. So let's do it about clean energy for health reasons.
Yeah. It's also stunting the growth, both physically and intellectually, of children who live near highways and things. I mean, we've all sorts of neurological deficits that have been well documented around this. It's also causing, cancers that may not be considered, like COPD kind of problems. I mean, yes, the gasoline-powered vehicles are emitting from their tailpipes poison. It is poison. If you inhale it, you die. If you inhale little bits of it over time, you will die. And we're all like, hey, we need to keep, having cars with fossil fuels, when if you're running an electric car, there's nothing coming out of the tailpipe. You can run it in your garage and you're not going to, I guess we're taking away a suicide technique, but that's about it. And so, Jim, you said it very, very well. Thank you so much for that and for laying it out. I appreciate it. Kathleen in Topanga, California. Hey, Kathleen, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. I wanted to give a response to what to do about the Democrats being called soft on crime.
Yeah.
I feel like what the Democrats should do is turn the tables back, like the Republicans often do, regarding Republicans have not denounced what happened on January 6th to the extent of, people injuring and killing police officers, along with the, voting to not voting to ratify or whatever I forget the word right now, the electors. Particularly
the Electoral College.
The fact that they have, that they have given space to the people in their party who, apparently they're doing exactly what they always do. They they're doing something, but they blame the Democrats frequently
It's
for the
projection.
things that they're doing. Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Yes.
They understand it well because they do it. So then they blame it, other people on that.
Yeah, but I just don't know how. I think there's time if they jumped on it in a marketing, marketing sense to put things together. Political advertising can be done in a very quick turn, and I think that they could bring something out about this, particularly in the races where they're pulling this, kind of stunt on Democrats.
Yeah,
but anyway.
I'm with you. I just, I wish they had been ready for it. Kathleen, thank you for the call. It's like you could have predicted it, and how do I know that? Because I did, and I hate. I told you so, and I don't mean to sound, I guess I sound whiny like that. It's like, damn it, this is obvious. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Hey, we've got a special report here. This is from a John Robbins piece called Realities for the 90s. The amount of soy grown in the U.S. consumed by livestock, 90%. The amount of corn grown in the U.S. consumed by livestock, 80%. How frequently a child on Earth dies as a result of malnutrition or starvation, every 2.3 seconds. The amount of total United States grain production consumed by livestock, 70%. The amount of U.S. grain exports consumed by livestock, 66%. The number of children who die as a result of starvation every day, 38,000. The amount of the world grain harvest consumed by livestock throughout the 1980s, half. The number of people who will die as a result of malnutrition and starvation this year, 20 million. The number of people who could be nourished with the nutritional value of the grain used to produce meat, 7. And it goes on from there. There's a whole video that summarizes all this stuff that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 10 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Good day, Tom. I'd like to throw some light on the growing relationship between right-wing Israeli politics, the Saudi royal family, and all the other wealthy Gulf state Arabs. They're in league with each other now, and one of the people at the center of it is Jared Kushner.
He is the person at the center of it. He was the one who pulled them all together.
Tom, do you know that Bibi Netanyahu is personal friends with Jared's family going back 40 years?
Oh, yeah. Bibi used to sleep in Jared's home.
Right. He's like his uncle.
Yeah.
They know each other very, very well.
Yep.
And I also want to point out, for instance, the Saudi Royal Wealth Fund, I just Googled it up, was like $660 billion. I thought it'd be more. But all that Saudi money is interwoven into the United States, a lot of it. I would say at least half of it. I'm sure a lot of it's in Europe, but it's in New York real estate. At one time, we were the largest shareholder of Citigroup, one of our biggest banks. So they have huge influence in our business.
Oh yeah, they own refineries all across the United States. Absolutely. It is a growing problem, Brian, and that's why I'm saying I think that we need to sever that relationship. Brian, thank you very well, brilliant to point that out. Nina in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Nina, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just wondering your thoughts, your brilliant thoughts on how the climate can ever stay well.
We've got to get carbon dioxide back down certainly below 400 parts per million. I mean, when Bill McKibben started 350.org, it was not yet at 350. and now it's like, I forget the number, 430, 440, something like that. We need to get it back down below 400 at the very least, because And that means regenerative agriculture. It means we've got to be working on carbon sequestration technology. We need to make the transition to green energy worldwide as rapidly as we can. Do you
think any of that is doable?
Yeah, I do. I'm still hopeful. I am concerned that we have passed a number of tipping points that may be irreversible, but I just don't see any percentage in curling up in a ball and whimpering and saying, okay, that's the end, I'm done. We've got to fight this all the way to the end, just like with politics. So, Nina, that's where I would go with it. Thank you for the call. Diane in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to quickly alert everyone that our 2nd district here in Rhode Island is probably going to flip from Democrat to Republican.
Because?
And it's going to be a guy named Alan Fung. He's the Republican running against the Democrat, Magaziner. And the last poll, it's been a while since there was a poll, but I can see what's going on. I can just see it. He was leading by 6 points back before we even had the Democrat primary. He was leading Magaziner by 6 points. And I can see the momentum building up. I drove through that district yesterday, and there were Fung signs everywhere, and there wasn't a single Magaziner sign anywhere, so I'm not hopeful. And his commercials that I see on, in the morning, I put on the local news at 6:30 to catch up on things and get the weather. And he is killing it with the commercials. He's he's a Trump humper. Okay, he ran for governor twice. He lost. The last time he ran for governor, it came out how much of a typical Republican he was. He would go on in his commercials about how Rhode Island is suffering and blah, blah, blah. And his first job as governor will be to attach work requirements in exchange for Medicaid. That was his big fix to fix Rhode Island. Like, oh, gee, it's my fault that
I
that
totally
Rhode Island
get
is
it.
suffering.
So
and he was at Trump's inauguration. He's there smiling with a red hat on, and now he's totally scrubbing that. He is now being branded as a moderate, and if you saw his commercials, you know what? If you didn't know the history, you'd vote for him too. He's got a plan to make us energy independent. And I'm like, wow, really? He's got a plan. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Diane.
And all I'm seeing from Magaziner, they're going with abortion, and that's it.
Yeah, the Democrats.
And I don't think that's going to work.
No,
it's
it's not enough to just lean on this one single issue. Diane, I do have to move along, but thank you for the call and for the heads up. Miriam in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Miriam, what's on your mind?
Yes, a quick one. Have you ever heard of a progressive independent?
Sure.
Why? Good. Because one knocked on my door the other day. Now I'm very progressive Democrat, but when this guy knocked on my door giving out his literature, and he says, "I'm a progressive independent," I'm going like,
You mean running for political office?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then he's probably being funded by the Republicans because this is what's happening here in Oregon. We've got an ex-Democrat running against a Democrat and a Republican for governor. So we've got a three-way race. She is funded by two of the biggest the two richest men in the state. And she's pulling enough votes away from the actual Democrat. She's no longer even in the Democratic Party. And she's, spouting a lot of Republican talking points. She's pulling enough votes. She's not going to win, but she's pulling enough votes away from the actual Democrat that in all probability we are going to end up with a Republican governor in this state. And, it's like I'm just watching it melt down in front of me. And it's like, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I understand.
Miriam, I got to run, but thank you for the call. If anybody comes to your door looking for, for your vote and they're not a Democrat, be wary. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything Goes Friday tomorrow, although Mark Pocan will be with us for an hour, and Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for an hour. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air. so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
May have it.
Hey, thanks so much for supporting our program. A short one this week. If you believe that someone is a billionaire without seeing their taxes, if you believe that someone is a genius if they hide their college grades, if you believe someone is a great businessman if they bankrupt multiple casinos, if you believe someone is an irresistible ladies' man but they have to pay for sex, if you believe somebody is a philanthropist if their charity was shut down for fraud, if you believe somebody was a patriot if they dodged the draft with phony x-rays of bone spurs, if you believe someone's a Christian who doesn't go to church and doesn't know what 2 Thessalonians is, and if you believe someone is an innocent man even after they refuse to testify and take the Fifth Amendment